welcome to this first episode of Concise Conversations featuring Jerome Nadel, Lead with Love. Today we're going to be speaking to a guy who's got over 3 decades experience working in Silicon Valley at executive level. He's also currently the president of the Chief Marketing Officers Club Silicon Valley chapter. So this guy has seen it all, he's done it all, and he's also super connected. So it's great to get an opportunity to speak to him about his career. And he's basically got several guiding principles that have seen him through. One of which is lead with love, and we'll talk about that in depth later. Another is he talks about an abundant scarcity mentality and how it makes sense to live life and do your career with abundance, giving more than you take, not transacting. We also talked to him about his marketing philosophy, which is a little bit different to some of the more traditional philosophies. So Jerome thinks that marketing should be part of the product development story. It shouldn't just be an extension, it should be intrinsic to everything that is done when you build a product or launch a service. We also talked to Jerome about his cycling. Jerome cycles at an insane level. He does races, and he cycles over 18,000 kilometers a year in these races, which I think is basically professional standard, but it assures me that's just a hobby. After we've done all that, we'll get to know Jerome a little bit better by speaking to him and asking him our first date questions. Enjoy.
Concise Conversations is brought to you by Concise Software, one of Europe's leading software development agencies, with over 10 years of experience in web, mobile, and emerging technologies. So contact us to see how we can assist in ongoing work or help bring new projects to life. So, Jerome, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's great to chat to you. We know that one of your great themes is leading with love, but before we get onto that, I'd like to take things right back to the start, because I know that you went to college and you had a sports scholarship and you thought that you were going to do a few business studies courses, and then you got interested in psychology, and then you somehow managed to come back to the world of business and Silicon Valley. Could you tell us what went through your mind and the process around that?
Sure. Yeah. And, firstly, thanks so much for having me. I guess, before university, for perspective, my mom is French and my dad was sort of a Brooklyn Jew. Post-World War II, and it's an interesting story, my dad was drafted post-World War II. They were still in draft and went over to the northeast of France to a small village near Alsace called Bar-le-Duc, where my mother was from. And she was a civilian working at the army base, and they met and fell in love. So I had a multicultural upbringing, if you will. My mom came over, and every summer, my brother and I would go over and spend, a couple of weeks in France with my mom. So that was a different orientation than the typical American kid. There was really this, view of a sort of humble global perspective. I was and with that, my dad did some college, but my parents were not really academic. So I, in fact, was the first one to go through university, if you will. My dad's dad did not, and my mom's dad was a prisoner of war and came back and died shortly after, being held prisoner. So, my mother and father loved me dearly in a Rogerian way, but they didn't have that academic or even athletic orientation. They were sort of like new parents. So I was athletic. I had a scholarship to a university that wasn't, a top university, and I was excited to run and went into college in that orientation. I did well in school, but again, I was more of an athlete than a student. While I was in university, I went in assuming that I would have a general business degree, but took courses in philosophy and psychology and just loved that. It was a different, it wasn't studying to be credible for a job. It was really learning about things that I found truly interesting. And the university that I went to had an honor psychology program, and I participated in that and really learned that psychology is more than, pop psychology today, just a clinical orientation, but it's a very vast field that really focuses on a lot of experimentation, how you set up experiments, how you assess hypotheses, how you do the statistical analyses. And I found that really intriguing. and realized later in university that, if I didn't go to graduate school, there wasn't a way forward. So
Right.
for me, it was almost being pulled to that next thing, and maybe we could speak about that too. I didn't really know where I was going, but I felt the next thing had to be going off to graduate school. And with that, my grades were pretty good, and I did have a fellowship that brought
Yeah.
me to graduate school. However, albeit Kansas State University, which is sort of the armpit, respectfully, of the U.S. And I said to myself, well, I'm going to be here for 5+ years. Let me just go to a place where I could immerse. And there was another thread associated with that because I was still athletic, but transitioned from being a runner to getting on a bike and falling in love with the bicycle. And while I was in graduate school, I was pursuing a PhD in applied experimental psychology, but I was also pursuing a sort of elite cycling calendar and
Right.
really doing both at a very intense level.
Did you think at any point that you might be able to make it as a professional cyclist, or is that never really on the cards?
I as I shared, my parents didn't really push me athletically, but I had coaches who did, and I started running really young. The way school went where I lived, and it's different in different parts of the world, of course, and even different in the US. Here, middle school was 7th, 8th, ninth grade. So when I was in 8th grade in the middle of junior high school, I was second man on the high school varsity cross country team, which meant,
Right.
I was this little 92-pound kid that would get picked up by the coach and hanging out with all the big kids that were like smoking weed
Yeah.
before practice and the like. So it was a very different orientation for me starting so early. So by the
Yeah.
time I fell in love with the bike in university, I didn't have aspirations. I didn't want it to be this monolithic, it's all I do. I loved racing. I loved training for racing, but no, I enjoyed the level that I was doing it at, which was intense, competitive, and elite, but not, with aspirations of being professional.
That's fair enough. So then you were doing your post grad in psychology, and then that somehow led you back into the world of tech and Silicon Valley. How did that shift take place? Was it always that way, or did you think about being a clinical psychologist or something like that?
So, as I said, psychology is so varied. There's so many disciplines within. And the program I was accepted to was what's referred to as industrial organizational psychology. And that really has two dichotomous halves. The industrial side is more, how do I select people? How do I measure performance? So it's very statistical, where you're looking at, the validity and reliability of measures that would say this person as a candidate would fit well and be effective. And then on the organizational side, these are the dynamics of groups that are effective, which intrigued me. And you could
Yeah.
even relate it to cycling to say, what is the psychology of the peloton? When does a group work together? When do they not? So I was the O side of IO. And in fact,
Right.
the PhD program had a master's thesis, and then you went on and did another piece of research for your PhD dissertation. My master's thesis was on the effect of self-esteem on decision making in the context of a failing decision. So the way this went was, um, normally we look at self-esteem as being only a positive attribute. More is better. I'm confident they have higher levels of self-esteem, but research had demonstrated that those with extremely high levels of self-esteem often don't engage in as much information search when making a decision, and they don't
Okay.
respond to feedback once they have. So we were looking in a business context of, what does this really mean? Can we validate that super high levels can be dysfunctional? And what sort of person in an organization, should have that high level of self-esteem? Should it be just the boss? Should that boss be surrounded? And the irony is, as I was taking esoteric psychology and applying it to a business context, I was a kid. I had no idea how this really manifested in the real world. So, it was sort of an academic imagine this business context. And then I did a huge pivot where, organizational psychology, I could go in and be sort of connected to human resources and people management. but I got much more esoteric and scientific. I shifted over, and back then there wasn't really usability or user experience. There weren't these sort of programs. I'm now in the early 80s here, and I shifted over to a program called Applied Experimental Psychology. And that really was the connection, the nexus of cognitive psychology and perceptual psychology. Cognitive is more, what are mental models? How do we think? And that's really evolved into computer science with parallels and trying to explain and design computer architecture against sort of neuromorphic concepts. And perception, is super basic. How many photons to see, how many decibels to hear? How do we perceive things and then interpret them cognitively? And the application of that was really focused on, how do you design systems that people can use? And that was my big pivot to focus on that. And I had the opportunity, which was pretty nice, to be accepted to a couple of research fellowships by the National Scientific Research Foundation, where I had 2 10-week summers doing some really cool research connected to the Air Force, but as a civilian, because a lot of this research was around how the complexity of an airplane and what it's like to fly, and notions of like the sacred six as the key instruments, and how you might move from an analog display to a digital display, and the beginning at that time of heads up. And if I were looking at one piece of information, how could that be updated as opposed to looking around? So I did that. I then was accepted by IBM on what they called a professional internship. My thesis, my master's was done. I was a PhD student, and spent a year at their global headquarters in North Carolina in the US as a human factors practitioner, which is another story, because I didn't really like it. I said, this is not for me. The way they do research is the product is done. They sort of argue for changes that need to be made, and it wasn't taking this art and science and bringing it at the beginning of product conception. It was really evaluating that the product is, fit for good to go into market.
Yeah, I think we'll touch upon that later when we talk about your marketing philosophy, because it does feel like,
it's related.
But before we go on to that, it's I've always thought that when we think about Silicon Valley, we're always thinking about disruption and change, and that's true. But what I've seen from like interviews with you in the past is that you've got these key principles and ideas that you keep with you as you've gone through things, and they seem to have kind of like been there all the way. I mean, am I right in thinking that, or did they evolve over time? How did they come about, and if you could go through with them?
Sure, both. I think that they're formed early, but they become sort of reinforced and, and pillars of belief. And I've got 2 kids, no longer really kids. One is now 31 and she's pregnant with her second child, my daughter Mallory, and I have a son,
Congratulations.
Ethan. Thank you. Just did a gender reveal and all that good stuff. So, it's really amazing to see when your children have children, really the purpose of life and all that of, just extending families and such, and humanity. And I have a son who's now 26, and I got divorced and had full custody of my kids following the divorce, and I'm super close with them. And there were a lot of what my kids call dadisms, and that was sort of the beginning of documenting the notion of these pillars of belief. And one of them was lead with love. And I would say to my kids, from an existential philosophy perspective, that you should go into the world always giving and leading in a positive way. And it's going to happen at times that you don't get that love reciprocated, but keep doing it. So that manifested into things like, and my kids still say to me, they see a piece of trash on the ground and they'll pick it up. And they'll come back and say, Dad, you always made us do that, because it doesn't matter if it's our trash or not. We can go ahead. And another related one is, give more than you take. So to me, this goes back to, what intrigued me in university about philosophy was that notion of having an orientation that either, describes or explains the world, and how you interact with the world. So those two, lead with love, give more than you take, to my kids, and I think it's so relevant in the business world as well, as don't compare. I think as human beings, we can be happy or sad, and often when we're sad, we don't appreciate what we really have, and we look at ourselves against others, and that creates a transactional competitiveness where we should really be happy for other people's success. Even as an athlete who
Yeah.
races and wants to win, when other racers win, it's good. I like to win too, so they deserve to win in that way. And um, there are some others. We'll talk later about a notion of abundance and scarcity and continua like that. But yeah, these pillars are meaningful. And again, finally, as a father, it was nice because when I would say it to them, I was saying it to myself. And these
Yeah.
very high level, axiomatic philosophical notions really do apply in business context. So there really isn't a difference between how we live our lives outside of work and how we live our lives in work, to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, yeah, when I heard you speaking about the leading with love one as well, it's good because it's got so many different ways that you can interpret it, and all of them are positive. Leading in a business setting, leading as in moving forward with love. So that really resonated with me when I saw that one.
Out here in Silicon Valley, there's the notion of disruptive technology. Be disruptive to be the unicorn. I, I really don't get, because I think that the challenge of the notion of disruption is very zero-sum game, that
Yeah.
somebody's going to disrupt and everybody else will lose. Where I actually add a modifier to that, and I describe it as inclusive disruption. Rising tide floats all boats. So if you come up with something that's innovative, that's a paradigm shift, probably the best long-term sustainable business model is that the disruption would be inclusive, meaning that others in the ecosystem benefit from that too. So it's not you beating everybody else in the corner, fighting them off, because if that's your posture, you need to continue to fight them off. But if you can have a framework, we could talk in software design, modern software design, of connections, of APIs. It's no longer building proprietary walled gardens. It's about interconnections and the aggregation of what's available. So I think that's even philosophical too. Modern software architecture is a way of leading with love and being inclusive.
Yeah, it's also a little bit like you've seen your own sort of approach as something to design, and stepped back a little bit and said, like, how do I design my own way of approaching the business world, and done that with a lot of self analysis and self thought, and tried to build something around that.
Yeah, you hear today a lot of the rhetoric of purpose-built organizations, but it's true. If your intent is just to make money out of whatever you're doing, it's not sustainable. You don't have real authentic brand or meaning. But when you do
Yeah.
something that does really add value and helps others too, again, I think thinking ecosystemically, don't try to beat everybody else. Once again, don't compare. Be mindful of your position, but be confident enough that you are a front runner by how you act.
And that leads into that. It's good because they overlap, and that leads into the concept of abundance and scarcity. If you're approaching things abundantly, you are confident that there's enough to go round, and if you act positively, there'll be more for everyone, and you can share it.
And that for me, that simple notion of this continuum was a bit of an epiphany. We sort of know it, it's so basic, but let me describe that a bit. The notion, again, if you drew a line and on the left you had scarcity and on the right you had abundance, it's a continuum. And we often live in scarcity. You could even get Maslowian and say when you have these physiological needs, you're at the bottom of the triangle, and you're focusing on getting the food and the nutrition to survive, and being self-actualized at the top, is really where you want to be. I look at it, and I've seen this in organizations where companies can act in scarcity. When you're feeling, as a public company, quarterly earnings are coming, and you're concerned about, having to speak to performance and earnings per share, and you start seeing the executive team operate on a spreadsheet. It's how are we going to focus on cost management and operational efficiency to generate the earnings per share, as opposed to, how do we even speak to the opportunity ahead? And the notion of scarcity to abundance is suggesting, firstly, be sensitive to where you are on that continuum. We can often feel scarcity when we're really living in abundance. And it's harder to feel abundance when you have a level of scarcity. So this is an orientation of knowing where you are, but sort of moving forward into the space of abundance, or abundance. Yes,
Abundanceness, that's a good new word.
abundanceness. It's the word of our talk. Um, and I think it's just so relevant because, again, even racing can be that way, where you're sitting back to save and save and save and want to be there for the end. And typically, when you race that way, you're really not there at the end. Where if you give it, you can keep giving it. And the notion of abundance is, don't be naive, but almost in the spirit of lean startup and leap of faith, believe there's something there. And I think compelling management helps their teams feel abundant opportunity, and they enable everybody to contribute more freely by not locking them down with a scarcity mindset, not being repressive but being opportunistic. And yeah, that's such a simple notion over here, but again, if we just remind ourselves at a daily basis, today I want to make sure that I have the right level of abundance in my point of view, that can affect everything. It affects how you interact with others. It affects how you feel about yourself. It affects how successful you can be in a business context as well.
Yeah, and that I'm just trying to imagine what it was like for you going into some of these organizations with that mentality and that philosophy, and whether how you were able to drive that through, how you try and get other people who were working from spreadsheet and quarter to quarter to buy into that methodology.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very deliverables oriented. The proof is in the pudding. So you've got to show what you're going to do. I'm a believer in 30, 60, 90, 120s. Let them know, tell me what you're going to do it. And when you do show something good, use that as an increment to move forward, which
Yeah.
is another related topic. I heard this brilliant interview with Barney Frank, who's an American politician, but an author and just a quirky, interesting guy. And he talked about incrementalism versus interventionism. So the notion of an intervention, we know, is I'm going to come in and, kick ass and affect change, and we're going to pivot. Where incrementalism is more gentle and says, to really get from here to there, even if you can massively intervene, the long-term effect of that is hard to manifest. But if you can increment towards a goal with a structure, you're going to bring people along with you. You won't be the one having to keep, plowing the rock in front of you. And I really aspire to that notion of incrementalism. And I think quality deliverables, being precise about what you want to do, and then demonstrating that you're doing it, and then sharing love, sharing the result of what
Right.
you've done, brings everybody along. And, the frustration in part for me on the marketing side is often marketing is perceived as a support function. It's a cost center without a P&L. When you come to every year's annual operating plan, you need to justify the budget against your deliverable. And it always felt, even at the most executive level, that it could be a second class position, where in fact, I've been a general manager as well, and GMs in public companies typically make more because they have P&L responsibility and authority. I think we're all equal. And I think, it's the executive marketer who falls into that trap of, I am second class, I'm serving those who own the P&L, you need to be confident in the value of your deliverable. Every
Yeah.
musician in the orchestra is important. It's not just, the front violin. So having that orientation of believing that you are a contributor and showing quality results that drag people along in the direction that you're
Yeah.
advocating is my way of, trying to affect change incrementally.
Yeah, and that sort of brings in like the other philosophy of yours from marketing that I picked up on was how you've got to be really involved in the product, and the marketing should evolve from the product with the product rather than just having a product and being told, hey, go and market this.
Yeah, it's almost definitional when you think of, and I'm close to marketing. I don't consider myself to be a classic marketer because I think at some level, classic marketing is downstream. So just again, let's
Yeah.
dichotomize downstream and upstream. Downstream is very much we have a brand, we have a product. I need to promote this to create demand that translates to leads to sell and be effective. So the classic role of the marketer, when you think of advertising, branding, promoting, is really downstream. And that's a very important component of contribution to a business, but it's the downstream portion. Where the upstream portion, to me, taking a marketing view of the world, is very existential. Um, who and what are we? How do we fit? What is our core competence? What might we do against problem and opportunity, in the universe? And then that's strategy. That's strategy at the top level. And then articulating that into product and portfolio to say these are the products that, be they service, digital or analog, physical, these are the products that we have. Let's optimize them in a portfolio and look at how we bring them into market. So the notion upstream of strategy, conception, product ideation, product development, portfolio optimization, and now you go over to the downstream and look at promotion and everything I said, suggests that there really are these two halves. And I find even in Silicon Valley, and I'm the president of the Silicon Valley San Francisco CMO Club. There's about 650 executive marketers connected to this. Salesforce last year acquired the CMO Club, so now it's a
Okay.
Salesforce entity, and there are chapter presidents around the world, and Silicon Valley is a meaningful chapter within all of
Yeah.
that, and so I'm connected to this universe of marketers, and I say to them, to my friends, that being lateral and transversal and being upstream is really the big aspect of marketing, and the downstream is meaningful as well. And I describe that as a design thinker, as design-led marketing. That
Right.
if the story that you create in conceiving the product is good, it creates a great product, and that's the story that should be used to promote it. So the beginning is the beginning. The end is how you've leveraged the beginning. But often you find, let's bring in branding agencies and the like, and it's completely disconnected, to the conception and the
Yeah.
gestation of whatever you were doing. And it's, to me, disconnected, inefficient, inauthentic, and problematic.
Yeah, somehow trying to reverse engineer a story into something that wasn't there at the start, somehow makes it much more difficult to get everyone to buy in, I would imagine.
I think so.
Yeah. So I'd just like to talk a little bit more about your cycling, because you've maintained a high level of cycling throughout your life, to a level that most people would think was, would be like a pro-am level of cycling, which would take up a lot of time, and most people wouldn't have much time to pursue other things, such as a high-level career and a family, and be the president of a CMO's club and all the other external activities you do. So how have you managed to bring the cycling aspect into your life and maintain it?
Firstly, I think, as they say, speaking another language opens your brain. So the idea of being monolithic, makes one myopic. So if you only do one thing, it's hard to open your eyes to everything else that you could do. And it's interesting. I remember back in graduate school, there was a school newspaper, and there was a write-up on me in a race that I had just won out of state. And I was called into the dean's office, and I got along pretty well. I was, by this point, a very serious student, and worked hard. And he brought me in and challenged me. He said, how can you be a PhD student and go around the country racing your bike? And I was really affected. I was impacted by that, because I said, I think this notion that you could only be good at one thing, that people inside of us, we need channels to express ourselves. And I have a lot inside me that I want to channel. And in fact, the more I ride, the better I can be as a student, and then later, as a professional. Now, for me, most of my colleagues were like, yeah, you're weird, you ride a bike. They had no idea. I mean, last year I rode almost 18,000 kilometers. So I ride, to be good at racing, you have to ride a lot. Now, as well, the folks I race against don't really know what goes on professionally. And I
Sure.
love this duality over here, because when I'm, with those that I ride and race with, that's the orientation. And then I'm with those who I work and collaborate with, that's the orientation. But there's a lot of carryover. I think, this notion of abundance, racing is dangerous fundamentally. If you watch Pro Peloton, these guys just fall and get up, and I'm going to be 59 this year. So falling is definitely not a preferred, scenario outcome. So, but if you're afraid of falling, it's more likely you're going to fall. Almost
Okay.
matrix like, if you could put yourself in it and just feel the flow and feel the opportunity, and not be racing against everybody else, but permissioning yourself to move forward. And I use that word selectively because I really believe it. What happens in these races is you get to, 5, 3, 1K to go, it gets very frenetic. And if you permission yourself to move forward, it lets you move forward. It's magical. And I think it's easy to think of cycling as it's aerobic and muscular. It's strategic and artful, intellectual. And the same gamified approach that enables you to win in a race, you can apply to work.
Yeah.
Or I could say it another way, the same dynamic of managing and operating in abundance at work, you can apply to the bike. So for
Yeah.
me, these are very disconnected vectors of channel in
Yeah.
me, but they really overlap. And I think, if I love the bike, it's a freedom, it permissions me to take that time, but I'm very habitual. And that's another aspect of athletes, I find, that a thing that everybody can relate to who's sort of diehard is there is a habit, good or bad, connected to it. People are like, you're so disciplined, they have no idea. It just feels better to be able to do it. But for me, and different folks are different, if I didn't race, I don't think I'd ride the way I do. The excitement, the theater, the art, the intensity of racing is, I can't get that same high, that same sensation out of work, out of
Right.
my professional life. It's just not as intense. And yeah, the theater of racing is a brilliant thing. And this COVID year, really, you talk about sadness and depression of not being able to do. I think it hit this ilk of folks in a really hard way, because it was like taking away something that was, part of um, our ourselves.
And is it coming back soon, or
Yeah, I have a race on
yeah?
Saturday.
Awesome.
There's
Brilliant.
there's this nowhere town in California called Chowchilla, and I've
Right.
called it the Thrilla in Chowchilla.
Well, you should get into marketing. That sounds like a great name for it.
I've had one
Um,
vaccine as well, which I'm really excited about. My second one is coming up in a couple of weeks here. So, let's all get vaccinated. Let's all move forward and do our
yeah,
part like that.
get back into
Yeah.
hopefully a new normal. Let's hope there are some changes after all this period. Are there any sort of changes after this that you are looking forward to from life that wasn't there before COVID hit?
You know, I mean, you'd think that the notion of a global pandemic would have all humanity acknowledge that we're all the same and all equally vulnerable, and somehow it hasn't.
Yeah,
So I don't know what it would take to teach that lesson, but I don't necessarily think it's going to happen. I think human memory is short, and we'll get back to the new normal, and that will feel like the new normal.
yeah,
Um, but humanity needs to be mindful of what we do to Mother Earth, of course, and probably this notion of annual vaccines, because we're really living on someone else's planet, then we need to sort of inoculate ourselves against, the disruption that we've created. It's almost
yeah,
letting us know where we stand. So I'd imagine that we're going to live in a world of more annual vaccination to survive.
yeah. And let's just hope enough people lean in and lead with love on that concept than don't. And then, like, just touch on one last thing: is how do you now see the tech industry evolving? What strategies are going to be successful in the next few years? And do how do you see yourself slotting into that in the near future?
Mm. Yeah, I'm doing some really exciting advisory work now for companies all over the map. And, you look at the laggards who have been successful, and in the spirit of what got you here won't get you there, there's a lot of, revisioning, innovation, challenge on business model, this sort of thing. And then for those that are, new and starting up, trying to differentiate their technology and how it fits in the world. I think models of software development have changed and are really exciting. It's a world of aggregating pre-existing ingredients. So the notion of, a walled garden, an owned vertical stack to fight everybody else off, with the moat that protects us is gone. So when you look at modern software architecture, it's open source API, and it's really how do you best aggregate services. And the notion of, APIs as hooks to service
Yeah,
changes the notion of a product, which is a noun, to a verb. And
yeah,
so this orientation of service design, of open ecosystem, of inclusive disruption is the modern orientation. And even, from an in-source versus outsource, even for the companies I advise, when they're looking at their internal capabilities, they can focus on hiring more to do everything, or they could focus on, an agile position in the ecosystem where they're saying there are those that are better at this than us. Let's figure out how to coexist, but still differentiate on, the ingredients that we put together to serve a market or set of customers in a unique way. So the paradigm, I use metaphorically of APIs, of aggregation, of integration, means that companies don't need to own and do everything. They need to coexist, and they should be partnering out. And those who focus on being nimble with thinking about how services would come together to create product um, have a lot of viability to me in these times.
cool. Well, thanks a lot. It's great talking to you. I'd just like to finish on our first 8 questions, if you don't mind. It's just a bit of fun.
An Apple.
An Apple,
Things have
which
changed. I mean, back in the day, a computer um, had more utility than fun. So
right,
my first owned computer that I could call my own was an Apple IIc. And that was the first, it's a quirky computer because you had a monitor and you had a
yeah.
CPU. And it was sort of portable because the monitor had a handle on it, and so did the CPU. And that was leaving undergraduate going into university. So it's not like I was, a 14-year-old programming on a Commodore 64. I was more athletic. The first orientation to a computer was as a tool, as utility. But I was intrigued by, dismantling because even in undergraduate, the research I would do, I used a mainframe computer with a dumb
Right.
terminal and JCL. So the idea of, I could take that and have my own computer and do basic word processing and the like felt like, the beginning of something
It's the
big
future.
like that. um, I It's amazing as an athlete how sensors and analytics have changed everything. I mean, I grew up with graph paper and I would note what I did and then even try to do trend analyses. I love graph paper. And now, everything is sensor based. So, for example, on the bike, there are sensors in either your pedals or your crank to show force you're applying dynamically left and right. There's, of course, sensors for GPS, that show how far you've gone and the altitude that you've gone. And when you aggregate all these back to what we talked about software design, these connected APIs and mashup, you now have
Yeah.
these analytic tools that are brilliant that enable you to sort of identify the workout that you want to do or post hoc look at what you've done in a synthesized way. And there's a startup, San Francisco based, called Strava,
Yeah.
that is a fun sort of social platform that does beautiful aggregation. So it's, there's a little bit of the narcissism of other folks seeing that you've ridden and given kudos on that. But to me, the magic of taking all of this data and aggregating it in a way that is consumerized and pleasurable is really, really cool. um, one thing is I've moved house and I've just done a big sort of remodel and my cooking range. Now I
Oh,
know
right.
again when you talk about an oven, you wouldn't call it a tech purchase, but to me, still there's quality in hardware and there's quality in digital. And it's
Yeah.
German Miele or Miele, just beautiful industrial design coupled with intuitive, efficient electronics makes for
Yeah.
something that is a showpiece. And I think the art of physical product design should live long, and then coupling it with digital. So I'd call that a tech purchase. And then, I guess
Yeah.
if I had to pick another over here, these guys are amazing. Apple has done a really great job with these sound quality and the way they fit. And yeah, there's a lot of technology inside that we might not appreciate, but makes them pretty brilliant.
Yeah, we thought that was we used to think that was quite a focused question ourselves, but now when you ask someone what's your best tech purchase, it could be anything from a smart lawnmower to a smart bit of food or whatever. So it's good to get
Yeah,
that.
everything is
So
smart. Yeah. Mm. I've lived in France twice. In 2000, I was part of a French startup that we sold to a French company based out of the south of France. So I lived in outside of Aix-en-Provence, and
okay,
I adore Provence. Living in the Bay Area here in the peninsula, as we say, has that same climate, but it's a little bit faster paced and more connected to technology. But there's something remarkably romantic about the south of France. I also lived in Paris for 3 years, and that is not. I'm less of, I know you're a Londoner. I'm less of
Yeah.
a city guy than I am a country guy. I love, in fact, at this point in my life, I'm actually looking at where another home in the world might be. And yeah, probably not to sort of go back to what I know, and I've traveled to a lot of places. The south of France is really special, more Provence than Côte d'Azur.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, they're not a city, more a grande ville or something like that.
Exactly.
Do you speak fluent French?
Not as comment vas espagnol. My mother,
Okay.
just harasses me endlessly. So our conversations have to be, in French, and then I'm begging her to switch back over to English. But yeah, it's okay.
I think at least if you try, it goes a long way.
Absolutely.
And then we've got our own patented concept, Room 202. It's got nothing to do with George Orwell's Room 101, but it is similar in that, if there was a piece of technology that you had to get rid of from the world and put into Room 202, what would it be?
I don't know that it would be the technology only, but social networking platforms are great, but also dystopian as well. And, the notion of influence by algorithm. I mean, it's one thing to have a business model that, sticks something up in front of me based on my behaviors and profile, which is intrusive, but it's another to, have a framework that enables misinformation to be propagated. And I have friends who work at Facebook at the executive level, and I'm not picking on any given Twitter, Facebook, and the like, but the way that propaganda used to be, leaflets dropped from a plane. Um, that's bad enough, but the ability through the pervasiveness of the internet to spread bad is a virus itself. So I wouldn't say, stop social networks. I would just, there does need to be a form of regulation about how we use technology. And, tech for good, purpose driven, all of the good is good. But, you know, America has been pretty challenged in these last 4 years over the spread of misinformation, and even during a pandemic to not allow truth and science to prevail, and have people believe conspiracy and mistruths as they're almost legitimate. I think that somehow we need to regulate humanity, and to the extent that technology um, doesn't do that efficiently, it's almost like GDRP. You do need some governance on privacy and our data, and we just need to find that right balance of how we leverage and benefit technology, but how we don't let it go too far that that it causes bad.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it, and I'd love to get rid of that as well, that aspect of it. And then our final question, always very important for us, is what's your favorite keyboard shortcut?
I'm basic. Control copy.
Oh, you can't get away
Sorry,
from the
I'm
classics.
not a copycat, but I just, I like to reuse, and yeah, that's probably by frequency. It's definitely the one that's on top. Of course, there's V on the other side of C, but we know that.
Yeah, the lesser, the younger brother of Control C.
There you will.
Brilliant. Jerome, it's been amazing talking to you. I could talk to you all day, but I know you've got other things to do with your time than just chat to me. But thanks for being on the show. And I really hope we can speak to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you. And I just applaud Concise for creating this platform to put this together. I've worked with them a set of times, and yeah, really, really great group. And I think that, this is a sort of benevolent platform, not looking at it in any advertorial way, just trying to get perspectives out there. So good for you for doing this, and good for them for supporting and hosting.
Thank you very much. Speak to you soon.
Okay, cheers. Bye-bye.
Moving